In Chapter 21, we'll be talking about budgets, and in Exercise 21.3, we're going to be specifically comparing a static budget to a flexible budget. And so a static budget is just what we prepare right up front. We have budgeted units, budgeted cost, nothing changes. With a flexible budget, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go back and plug in our actual units produced. And so what that does is if we look at a budget variance, there can be two reasons for the variance. Either especially when we're talking about cost, we could either have spent more money per unit, or we could have produced more units. So you can have a unit variance and a cost variance. And so by making a flexible budget, what we're doing is we're going back to our budgeted numbers and we're plugging in the actual units so we can see how well we managed our cost. So in this problem, so we have our regular static budget here, and then we have our actual units produced here. And so it wants us, so we have our budget information, like per unit information here, and we want to prepare a flexible budget. So let's plug in our actual units produced for January, February, and March. So we had 80,000, 90,000, and 95,000. And then, so the rest of the information we're going to plug in is going to be budgeted information. And so our budgeted so we're calculating our wages. And so we have direct labor hours per unit of 0.75. All right, so that's going to give us the total production hours, and then if we plug in our wages, and so the wages were $15 an hour, all right, so that will give us our total wages. And then for our production hours, so we already have, to calculate utilities, we already have our hours produced right here. And our utility cost is $1.20 per utility hour. All right, so now we have our supporting information, so now we can fill out our budget so it kind of matches what we had produced originally. So units produced, we calculated that at 80, 90, and 95. We have our wages. Whoops. Then we have our utility cost. And then for depreciation, that isn't going to change based on units, so we can just plug in what we had in the budget. All right, so now we have our flexible budget cost for January, February, and March, and it wants us to compare that to what we projected that we were doing. So the original budget was 1.265 for each month. But if we go through and compare that to what we actually spent, so in January we budgeted 1.1 million, and then based off of our actual units of production, we actually came in with less cost. So that means based on the same amount of units, we still spent less, which means we managed our cost well. And so that looks like that's what happened for each one of the months. So when we plug in the actual units, our cost that we actually that's I'm sorry, that's backwards. So our flexible budget is actually lower than what we actually spent. So what we actually did was we spent more. So really, if we would have managed our cost well, we would have only spent like 1,022,000. Where here we actually spent 1.1 million. So they actually did not manage their costs quite as well as they possibly could have.